Kevin Williams here on the Shore Sports Network, powered by Jersey Mike Subs. And as we've been doing on a regular basis, I call it a little bit of Kevin's Corner. We have been talking sports in this period in which there's not a lot going on the field or on the court. We've been doing interviews for the last few weeks, and today we do one which I think is important, is timely, and hopefully it will be powerful. I don't think I need to take people through what has happened in our country over the past week since the murder of George Floyd on Monday, May 25th. But I have three people with me who are obviously involved in sports and dealing with young athletes. They are leaders in their own right, and I appreciate them joining me. First up, let me introduce Tahj Holden, who's the head basketball coach at the Ranney School, former standout at Red Bank Regional, later at the University of Maryland, where he was key part of a national championship team, financial advisor with Janney Montgomery Scott, married to Carrie, the father of 5-year-old Cole, and of course, Max, who will be forever 3 and will forever remain in our hearts. James Young is the associate women's basketball coach at Monmouth University, former head girls coach at Red Bank, was a boys coach at Rumson Fairhaven, played at Red Bank Catholic, and a graduate of Green Mountain College in Vermont, married to Angie, the father of 2 young daughters, Maddie, age 6, and Juliana, age 5. And the guy with the tie is Dennis Adams. He is the principal at Manchester Township High School. He was a standout player there. That's his alma mater, and later at Muhlenberg College. He and his wife, Lisa, are the parents of 4 children, 3 girls who have made their mark on the basketball court, Deja, Dakota, and of course, Destiny, and a 14-year-old son, Darius. So with that, I say thank you all for joining me. All 3 of you have not been afraid to share your thoughts and feelings on the death of Mr. Floyd on social media. And James, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to paraphrase something that you shared. As a father, as a 43-year-old African-American, I'm hurt, tired, pissed off, frustrated, angry, and scared. You also talked about attending a private high school because that's where your parents felt it was best for you, and how at times you're almost ashamed of that. You have also challenged other blacks to not only vote, but fill out the 2020 census, which I thought was very interesting. And a quote here is, a teacher, coach, and father, I need to do better and not expect others to do it for me. Will you take the challenge with me? So with that, I introduce James Young, and you obviously, even days after this, I'm sure like your 2 contemporaries, very upset with what has happened.
It's been tough, Kevin. I think it's been tough for us, 3 African-American males, for a multitude of reasons. And one of the biggest reasons is we're all parents. And it's something that, although, Dennis's kids are older and Tahj and I have young kids, it's, as we go through society and we go through this issue, I just feel like it's been swept under the rug for far too long. And it's something that, as not just as African-Americans, but as a country as a whole, I think this is a time where, I don't know if the pandemic and having everybody at home and being accessible to this and seeing this on CNN or however you've seen it in Twitter and all the social media forms, but I feel like this is the right time that the conversation needs to be had. And it's really about, for me, educating people in this country on what has gone on and basically, where can we go from here? Because I always feel like when these protests or these incidents happen, I always feel like we lose steam and the message starts to get lost. So I'm hoping that stuff like you're doing today is a way to keep the conversation going and really about educating all that we can, especially the younger generation, because I think at the end of the day, we're all older. I think they're going to be the generation that if things are going to change, it's going to probably be them that's going to have to lead it.
Dennis, one of the things you shared on Facebook, I believe, was, I'm deeply saddened and disgusted by the events that led to the death of George Floyd. I am equally as overwhelmed with the desire to do something to make a change. As a principal, I am a role model to many students of all colors. What do I say to them as a hurting black man? And I'll ask you, what have you said to them?
Wow. Part of what I wanted to say to them was in that message I posted, and I wanted to say that I did have hope. But I think this has affected me more than any other incident that I've seen. because I watched a man lying there and adult men are on top of him, and I could see myself there just as he would as a black man. And that's one thing that black community has in common, in connection, that we've all have faced racism in one way or another. And I was waiting for someone to do something. I was waiting for someone to help that man because out of the compassion of their heart, and that never happened. And so that was deeply troubling for me. And then emotionally, it was something that I thought I would never see. So then as a principal in my position, I said, what can I do? Because students are looking and watching, what do we say? And I had an overwhelming feeling that I must do something. I must say something. Not only say something on behalf of the black community, but also send a message that, we are still to love our white brothers and sisters. Because I did go to the Asbury Park protest, and faith was restored because I saw so many people of other colors there to support the black community, and that did give me hope. But there's some things that there needs to be some tough conversations that need to be had. And one of the things that struck me is that the Black Lives Matter, that there's so many people that want to say that all lives matter. But to me, and I was sharing this with some of my white contemporaries, that's a slap into the face of a black person. Because one of the things as a black community, we want to be heard, we want to be understood, that far too long, our hurt is dismissed. The brutality is dismissed. And so we want to have a common ground where everybody is listening. When we say Black Lives Matter, we're crying out for listen to us. We're hurting. We don't deserve this. And so those are the conversations that I want to have, and I think that need to be had. And one of the things that resonated for me, Kevin, is that we need the white community to speak on our behalf. And I think that's something that when I've talked to young adults, that's resonating from them. That where are the people who say that you're my friends or treat me in a certain way? I need your voice in this fight.
You bring up a good point as I sort of go into Tahj. I think you guys are probably aware that an NBA announcer was fired earlier this week for All Lives Matter, using that in social media. And whether he knew about it or not is almost irrelevant. That is become an insult to the black community. They, of course, know all lives matter, but that's not what this is about. And Tahj, I'm going to lead into you. What really made an impression on me is something you shared on social media about an experience you had when playing AAU basketball as a teenager, 15 or 16 years old, in Bristol, Tennessee, when confronted by, let's call it, a group of rednecks, and they waved the Confederate flag. They shouted things at you, including the N-word, and you chased them a little bit, but you couldn't catch them. But that's irrelevant. What really resonated with me was all these years later, you admitted that still hurts.
Yeah, no, it definitely still hurts. And, I like to think jokingly that the reason I couldn't catch them because I was never a fleet of foot. But they were in a vehicle driving off. But yeah, it still hurts. It still resonates because that's not the first incident, nor will it be the last, right? So I shared those stories on my Twitter just because I wanted to have people understand that this is something that's been going on, not just to the George Floyds of the world, right, but to regular everyday folks like myself, like James, like Dennis, right? That these aren't just one-time occasions, and once they happen, oh, well, it's sad that's what happens to this particular person, but the world really isn't like that, right? Because I don't think that folks get the opportunity to see that aren't black, and especially who aren't black males, that happens on a daily basis, right? And to good people and to bad people just alike, and people who are going to uphold the law and who are breaking the law. So I thought it was important to share this story because people didn't know that about me, right? I had some of my teammates come back that were on that team and they didn't even know about it, right? Because it's something, how do I go tell my white teammates, like, I can't believe that me and Chris were just crossing the street and these guys came out here and said all these things. And I shared 2 or 3 other stories about my time, and that was in Bristol, Tennessee. But, I've gotten pulled over in Little Silver. I've gotten pulled over in Red Bank. I've gotten pulled over in Asbury. It's not, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. And I'm not saying it was simply because I'm black, but these things happen. And a lot of the times, thankfully, there is video now. Back when I was 15, you'd had to have a whole basically room full of camera equipment just to get that on film. But it is coming to light, and they're shining lights on it because people are able to record it. And I think why this time is so different is previously we've seen guys shot in the back, shot while sitting in their car, but that happens and it's over with. It's so quick. This was almost 9 minutes of a guy kneeling on another human without any regard for his life and his well-being. I think that's the difference in the events that happened last week versus events in the past.
Also makes someone like me say that, well, let's face it, we've probably only had the ability to video something on our phone within the last 10 or 15 years, right? But clearly what we saw, and we all saw it, almost 9 minutes of it, what we saw is something that's happened time and time again in the past, but maybe it came down to a witness saying, well, I saw him do this, and now becomes that person's word against the police officer's word. What do you think a jury's going to do when confronted with that? So the video, I think, is what really has, I want to use the word shocked, probably not as shocking to you guys as it is to me, but I think it shocked our nation. Would you agree?
For sure. I think the reckless indifference to human life was what was so shocking, and that, it doesn't take a long time for somebody to die who can't breathe, right? And we witnessed a human lose his life in those 9 minutes. And I think that's what's so traumatizing about this particular event. And like you said, it's happened before, right? There's lynch mobs that happened. People were hanged in public displays. Black people were hanged. And it has happened before. But this time, I think it's different because people believe we were past that because we had a black president. Right, or there's a black police officer, or there's a black, head of the union in the police department, and it just goes to show you that it doesn't mean just because you're in a position of power you can affect change. There are systematic issues that are allowing these things to continue to happen, and how do we change that?
For both James and Dennis, Tahj talked about that. What the incident he relayed is something that he's had issues of people, for years. He's had many times where he's been stopped doing this and that or whatever. And the bottom line is simply because he was black. So I wonder for you two guys, I assume you've been, I'll use the word victims of things like in the past. And how difficult, do you keep this inside you? Is this something that is built up over a long, long period of time? James, I'll let you kind of go first.
I'll tell you, Dennis, growing up and going to RBC when it wasn't, as diverse and still not incredibly diverse as it is now, and going to school in Vermont, there was a lot of racism. I mean, I've been called the N-word to my face. I've been pulled over, like Tahj just said, in multiple states for no reason. And I think, it's been tough. I can tell you this as a black man. I don't know how Tahj and Dennis feel. Even today at 43, when I get pulled over for anything, I get a pit in my stomach. And it is something that, it may make me get emotional, but I fear for my life. So I have my hands on that steering wheel and I'm gripping that thing as hard as possible because the color of my skin, if I make one move, I may not be here right now. So I think, it's a scary time being African American. It's always been. And I just think it's got to stop. It's something that's just so painful and it bothers me. And, trying to tell my 6-year-old daughter this morning about what's going on in the world became a tearful conversation with my wife and my daughter. Because she looks at me and goes, well, cops are supposed to protect you. Well, no, not all. So I do think, the racism that I've experienced has scared me. And it still scares me. And honestly, it scares me for my children, for Tahj's son, for Dennis's children, and for all African-American children in this country.
Dennis?
Yeah, I think, Kevin, is that incidents you never forget. They always stay with you. Even as a child, walking down the road, I remember walking down the street, minding my own business, going home, and someone yells the N-word out the window. Those things never escape you. How people, you're in the store shopping, and then people begin following you around the store, and you're just looking, you're just shopping. So those things are never forget. So all these little incidents the Black community carries with them on a daily basis. And I have to concur with James that even I now, as principal of a high school, yes, I am concerned when I drive in certain areas of what can happen if I pull over. You know, I have to think about that. What will I do? When I get pulled over, will I go in my glove compartment? I will not. I will keep my hands in a certain place, all those things, because the fact of the matter is they don't know me. All they can see is my color. And just like it could happen to someone somewhere else, it could happen to me. So that thought is always there.
You know, you mentioned that, Dennis, before you came on. Tahj and James and we talked for a couple minutes, and I told them one of the things that led me to wanting to do this week was a radio interview I heard over the weekend with Derek Mason, who's the head football coach at Vanderbilt University, and talked about his father used to get in his car and put a lanyard around his neck that had his driver's license and registration in it. And he told his son the reason he did that was, if I ever get stopped, I don't have to go to my glove compartment. I got everything right here. Now, that is obviously something I or no white person could ever relate to, but it is a daily thing in the Black community, and even you guys have sort of confirmed that. So I want to segue into this. And again, you're going to inform me, right? A 64-year-old white guy who doesn't know any of this stuff. At a certain age, when my son was a certain age, I probably sat down and had to talk with him, right? And for me, the talk was about sex, even though he probably knew more than I thought he knew at the time we had that talk. But I have read and heard that the talk in the Black community is often more mother and father talking to son or daughter about, if you ever get stopped by a police officer, here's what you got to do or what you can't do. Is that an accurate thing? And Tahj, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely accurate. We literally had this conversation yesterday in my household. My son wanted to go to Target and buy a toy gun, right? And I've been explaining to him over the last couple of weeks as to why, like, no, I don't want you to have a toy gun. And he got a water gun and he was happy with that. But he said he wanted a fake gun with fake bullets. And then we had to explain to him the story of Tamar Rice, right? And my son's 5 years old, but he looks like he's a second grader. So by the time he's as old as Tamar Rice, he's going to look like he's in high school, and he's only going to be 12 years old. So, the sad thing is I saw a little bit of the innocence that he had lost because I had to have that conversation with a 5-year-old kid just graduated pre-K yesterday. And I'm talking about why you can't have a fake gun with fake bullets and run around in the front yard and do such, right? And these are all the conversations that we're going to have. And I sat down with my wife and we're going to have to talk to them about police. And some of our best friends are police officers, ex-military guys. Like, I want police officers to go home to their families just like I want my son to come home to me, right? And I think that gets lost in the discussion where it's a Black Lives Matter thing versus the police. Right. And it's not that. We can have both things. There are dual existences in this world. And we can live in an environment in which Black lives do matter and all lives matter as well. Yes, I get that. But all lives aren't the ones that are dying at the hands of police officers. Right. George Floyd was Black. Tamar Rice was Black. We can go down the list. Philando Castile was Black. We don't see these stories of white police officers assaulting or murdering white people. Right. And why is that? I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but we're just not seeing the stories, right? It's happening more often, seemingly, in the Black community. And that's why Black Lives Matter and then why it's an important thing, an important stance. But yeah, these are conversations we have to have. And, my wife happens to be white, so it's not anything she's had to think about her whole life, even though she grew up in a diverse community. Her thought process is, well, this Black person is just like me. I don't see any difference. But the problem there becomes, now how do you become an ally? How do you voice your opinion that these things are wrong? Are you doing it? Have you done it? Right? And that's why we were talking about Drew Brees a little bit earlier, Kevin, before you got on, is, he issued his apology this morning. And who am I to say whether or not he truly means what he said in his apology? But I have to give him the benefit of the doubt in that he actually apologized, because there are a lot of people out there who are not apologizing, who are saying that this is not the actual way of the world, and you guys are just blowing this out of proportion, right? But if we do that to every single person who's apologizing, or to a Kevin Williams who's having us on this call, right, and say, well, yeah, he's trying, but he doesn't really mean it, then we'll never get anywhere, right? So I think that's an important aspect of it too, and not just say, all white people are bad, because they're not, or all black people are criminals, or all Mexicans are drug dealers, and etc. Right? Like, these are the things that we can't have, because not every black person is a criminal.
You mentioned, for those that don't know, let me just mention the Drew Brees thing. He, during an interview yesterday, basically said, he'll never stand with those who take a knee during a football game because it disrespects the flag and all of that. And while he, may have been sincere in saying when he sees the flag, he thinks of his grandfathers who fought in World War II, what it did was it set off a firestorm, because I think people are starting to all of a sudden, Colin Kaepernick's not the bad guy a lot of people thought he was, and even one of his teammates, Malcolm Jenkins, went after him big time, saying you just don't understand what it's at. Tahj mentioned that he did backtrack and apologize. Dennis, you have 4 children between the ages of 14 and 21. My guess is at some point you've probably spoke to them as a group or individually about the way they need to conduct themselves, which is a shame that you've had to have that conversation.
Yes, we've had that conversation, and just about how you conduct yourself if you get stopped by a police officer. And again, I want to also echo, this is not a black community versus the police officers. This is a human heart issue to me. There are some outstanding police officers, and then there are some police officers. There's some bad police officers. So this is not against the police officers, but also we have to consider the systemic way a police department operates, and that is something that has to be looked at. Because if that's not looked at, then the black people, how they're treated, will not change. And so it goes beyond just having conversation. Systemically, how does the police departments operate? What is going on in the community? Are there community ties with the black community? What's going on? And I think those are the type of questions and conversations that need to be have so there can be actionable change, not just conversations. Now it goes beyond that, and we need actionable change, so that those conversations become humanized. Because what's the problem is that when some police officers look at black people, they're not humanized. You know what I mean? And so until you have deep, direct conversations, then people are not humanized. And that's why I think this is a human issue. This is a societal issue, because for so long our society has not been dealing directly with the racism issue. Only when things happen we deal with it. We don't continually deal with it.
James, is it too simple to say this is not about black or white, but about right or wrong?
It's a lot deeper than that. I think that's the issue. It's not as simple as a black or white thing or a right or wrong thing. It's about 400 years of history. It's about how people have been treated in this country, and it's about how we move forward, like what Dennis said, with conversation and with action. I just feel like all this stuff happens because of one bad thing, and then it goes away. Then it comes back in 3 or 4 years. Then it goes away. And I just think, let's be honest, guys. If this incident with George Floyd isn't recorded last week, is there even conversation in this country right now about how police treat African Americans? We all know the answer is no. So I think that's why this becomes so important for people to really be educated. If you think about Drew Brees and what he said, and then his backtracking, he was educated by his teammates. And that's what gave Drew a chance to backtrack. And I'm like, Tahj, I am for with Drew. He's made his apology. Now your actions speak louder. Where do you go from here, Drew? Where does all of us go from here in conversation? So I think it's important that, no, it's not a simple black or white thing or a human issue. It's about a lot that has to be unpacked, talked about, discussed, and continually discussed. And I'm not just talking about in our homes. This needs to be brought up in schools. It needs to be brought up in schools of Asbury Park to where we live in Shrewsbury, which is not a diverse town at all. where when I go walking every day in the street, I make sure that I have a Monmouth t-shirt on every day so they know who I am just in case. So I think there needs to be a lot of conversation while the kids are young and as they grow older. And even with police departments, we need to find out why the systemic racism is taking place and how to fix it and make sure that towns that are not diverse, maybe you need to go to towns that are diverse and speak to the Black community. If you're in Shrewsbury, Little Silver, go into Red Bank. Speak with the powers that be at Red Bank. If you're in, Manasquan or Wall, go into Neptune or Asbury and speak to the Black community there, because I think until we have full dialogue and discussion and action, I don't think anything's going to change in this country.
I'll ask, and anyone can jump in first. Now that the conversation is at least starting, and I said earlier, people's ears are a little more open than when they used to be. What are the actions that need to take place? So this is not just talk is cheap, and eventually, somebody says, hey, you know what, in a couple of weeks, this will pass. There'll be another story. The pandemic will get bigger. We'll sweep this under the rug and we'll forget about it. What does have to take place for this to be now a thing where there's action and not just talk? Dennis or Tahj, you want to jump in?
Well, I'll say this. One of the things, as I said, I was overwhelmed, had an overwhelming feeling of what should I do. So I called our mayor of our town, and I called the chief police, and I asked him for a meeting. And so I had a meeting with them along with my oldest daughter to speak to them on behalf of the Black community, to talk to them about what can we do first in Manchester so that something like George Floyd does not happen. And they both were welcoming. We had a great dialogue. We had direct conversation, and we're scheduling something to do something, bringing in some community members with the chief there, with the mayor there, so we can have that dialogue. Because I felt like we have to go to places of power and influence if we want to kind of make any change.
Yeah, I think there has to be, first we have to start with atoning for the sins of the past, right? I think that's got to be a huge factor, because there's never truly been an apology for how Black people were treated in America for 400 years during slavery, plus the hundreds of years after slavery, or not hundreds of years for Jim Crow, but the years of Jim Crow. Immediately after slavery, there was roughly 80 years where Black people were here, but they weren't citizens of the United States and they had no voting rights. And also, when you look at slavery in general, that was a wealth transfer of epic proportions, where you're using the labor of the people to enrich yourself, as a slave owner, right? So when people currently say, well, I wasn't born back then, I didn't own any slaves, but you had the advantage of that 400, 500, 600 years of a head start. And then asking a group of people, why can't you be more like us? Or why can't you catch up? Or, when people are in situations where they literally cannot pull themselves up by the bootstraps because of the way the system works. And I'm not saying the system is broken. I think the system is working almost exactly how it was built to work, right? Let's not forget the history of what police officers were here to do at first, right? They were here to watch over Black people and slaves and be in that sort of realm. And that's a hard conversation to have. It's hard for me to have that conversation, right? But these are the hard conversations we're going to need to have, right? You have to apologize, then you have to educate, right? Because a lot of the American history we were taught in high school is not true American history. It's been, whitewashed to a degree, where you're not going to get the true essence of who an Abraham Lincoln was, right? Or who a Thomas Jefferson was, or who a George Washington was. We know all the good things that they did, right? But we don't necessarily know the things that they stood for, which may be different if you go and read a different history book. So we need that education part. And then again, we need to have things like this, and we need to have roundtables where we're having the discussions on how do we move forward from here? And how do we make things better? Because in 2 months from now, we can't have forgotten what happened, because we're now in phase 3 of the opening, and we can now go about our daily lives, because our daily lives aren't going to change, right? We still have that fear. Like James said, I still grip the steering wheel tight. And I, to this day, take my wallet out of my pocket anytime I get in the car and put it directly in the console so I have easy access to it. because I had that experience as a teen where I had it in my back pocket and I had to get out of the car and I got a ticket. Right. So these are the conversations we have to have. And I think those are some of the steps. And there are a lot smarter people than I that have been trying to deal with this for decades, for years. And we haven't still come up with a solution. So I think it's going to take all of us, not just the Black community, but the white community and the brown community as well.
What can obviously sports is a huge part of all three of you from the time you were young to where you are even today. What can we learn from sports? And I don't want to paint this picture like on every team, blacks and whites get along and it's kumbaya and they go to each other's house for dinner and all of that. But I think you'd all agree there are a lot of really good relationships that develop from sports. What can we take from that maybe will help some of this for the non-sports world, so to speak? James, and I'll let you go first on this one.
I think, sports has the power to change a lot of things, a lot of people. You think about 9/11, how sports kind of brought us kind of back. And I think sports has an opportunity to do it now. I think, a lot of my teammates I play with are white, and I've formed long-lasting bonds with them based off of a basketball, which has allowed me to travel and has allowed me to be at the position I am now. So I think sports plays a critical role because you always talk about sports, you're a team, you're a family. You're supposed to be part of something that's bigger than yourself. I think the ability to try and take that off the court, because the three of us are all basketball guys, to take that off the court and really be part of something bigger than yourself off the floor and understand the differences of your teammates. And I think that's the kind of conversation that maybe I think some coaches may want to have, even at the high school level. Let's talk to our kids. Let's get them to understand what's going on. Us three as African-American men, we need to share our stories with our athletes so they know where we've come from and why we are what we're doing today. Because, sports can help. It can bridge the gap. It can bring people together. But we as coaches and as principals, we have to be the leader to have that discussion off the floor to make this a better place.
Dennis?
And I agree with that. And I also think the difference in the locker room, which helps break down the barriers, is because relationships have been formed, right? And so the relationships are formed. So now you're just looking at, hey, Kevin and Dan, instead of necessarily, oh, Kevin is this color, Dan is this color, because there has been relationships formed. So I think that it is everyone's responsibility to make sure that their relationships, when whatever area you're in, if you're in Red Bank, if you're in South Jersey, whatever area you're in, you're responsible as a person to build relationships, and through those relationships you can break down racial barriers. Now, if you are a person that just stays with people that's just like you, then that's not going to break down anyone. So my comment is, then it's everyone's responsibility to go out of their comfort zone to make sure they're talking to people, meeting people, letting people know who they are. I take it personally that I want people to know Dennis. Yes, he's a black man, but to know Dennis so that they can then break down their barriers for the next black man. You know what I mean? And so I think that's an important issue that we all can do. Everybody can do that. Everybody can have a hand in, hey, relationships, love everyone, love, respect, dignity. That's something that we need to be systemic in a police department. You know what I mean? Common decency, how you treat one another. You know what I mean? I think that's can be where it starts.
Tahj, on that one?
Yeah, I think obviously sports plays a huge role in this, and we as coaches, like James says, have the obligation to have these discussions. I think where I would like to see sports interject itself more is like a situation like Drew Brees, right? These are people that are in positions of importance and power and visibility, right? Now, if Drew Brees can change, then there are other people that can change, right? So like James said, we have to see what his actions are going forward and making sure that this is not just smoke and mirrors and people are upset and he issues an apology so that he gets people off his back and he can go about his business. But people like a Drew Brees, people like just if you're going on quarterbacks, a Peyton Manning. But on the flip side, sports can also be some of the worst places for racism, right? If you take a look at just how many black NFL coaches there are, or black college coaches there are, or the lack of, right? There are only 3 current black NFL coaches, if I remember correctly, right? And the league is 70% African American. How is that possible? How are GMs, there are not more African American general managers and owners, right? Because we're just not in those positions. But if those people in power can now speak up and make changes in their own communities, then I think that goes a long way. Because if you live in the 1st ward or the 3rd ward in Louisiana, like you're still a Saints fan, right? You're still a Drew Brees fan because he wins you football games. And those are the people that have to take the leadership in their own communities to be able to make this change. Because, people that look like Kevin and Drew are going to go talk to people that look like Kevin and Drew more effectively than James and Dennis and Tahj are going to go talk to people like Kevin, right? Because in a group full of white people, they're all going to be guarded. It's just like if Kevin came to talk to a group full of black people, we're not going to all of a sudden be all kumbaya and there's going to be some things that we reserve because you're not black, right? Or Drew Brees is white, and he can have those conversations a little more open than I think we can, because people are going to be guarded with what they say around black people.
I'm encouraged, and again, I can't even relate to what the 3 of you and basically every person of color has lived with for all these years, but I'm encouraged by the involvement of a younger generation, which I hope is not just involved because they're bored with virtual learning or they really don't have anything to do. But I'm encouraged, for example, and I'll throw out a couple of names and you're all familiar with them. I've seen in the last couple of days, Elijah Barnes, who was an outstanding player at Modern Day Prep and is going to be a senior at Princeton University, is involved in the movement, is going to be involved in a march and protest. Tahj, with Scotty Lewis, who's your former player, these are both outstanding young men, articulate, thoughtful, and they want to be part of the change. And I think those people make a greater impression than some others. So the fact that I think the younger group, because listen, my generation, we screwed it up. We didn't do enough. And, we can make attempts now to not only apologize, but try and bring about change. But really, it's the younger ones who are going to make change that is everlasting. So I'm going to leave you with this because I could do 2 hours with you guys, and I'm so respectful of the time you've given me. So I'm going to ask you all the same question. And James, I'm going to start with you. If we could fast forward 10 years from today, what do you hope has come about from what's taken place in our country over the last week or so?
I think the conversation's got to continue. I think the dialogue's got to continue. I think it's got to be tough conversation. It's going to be stuff that's going to be very uncomfortable for a lot of people, black and white. I also urged the black community and also whites to vote. If you want your voices to be heard in this country, you must get out, you must vote, and you must educate yourself on what is going on, not just nationally, but more importantly, locally, in your town, in your county, in your state. Know your politicians, know what they stand for, know their beliefs, because if we want to make change, it's probably going to have to start from the inside out. So I'm hoping that the conversations in our towns and in Monmouth and Ocean County and the state of New Jersey becomes one of understanding each other, learning from each other, but also, people that don't agree with change or want change, we need to start finding politicians that do believe in that.
Dennis Adams?
Yeah, I think looking ahead 10 years from now, I think if you have people of different colors come to a table and say, how do we break this systemic racism apart? How can we build something that is pure, that is good? And they come to the table and they put in legislative laws and put policies and procedures and organizations and judicial systems, the penal systems, so that they are not targeting a group of people. I think when you have people come together, because that's actionable change, right? That goes beyond the conversation into what can we do so that this won't perpetuate itself through systems. And so the only way you can do that is you come to the table, you look at it, break apart the system that exists, and then look for ways to change it through actionable laws, procedures. I think that goes through sports, that goes through education, that goes through judicial system, the penal system, our governmental bodies, all those, because now what are people going to do? We want to see action, we want our voices to be heard. Okay, so now what action are you going to take place so these things won't continue to happen? And so that's what I think the Black community is looking for, the change on a level that can really make a difference.
Tahj Holden, you get the last word.
Yeah, I think just echoing what these two gentlemen said is that we need people in positions of power that understand, that are empathetic, that are sympathetic, right? Not just to the Black plight that we have going on right now, but also that understands the mentality of the person that's living in Alabama and somewhere that is racist, right? And understand what it's going to take to change their viewpoint, right? And not just paint them all as terrible human beings, right? Yeah, they have a bad way of thinking, but they're not bad people, right? We have to be able to have that conversation with those people, those types of people, and come out of it on the other end without it being, oh, I won or you lost. It's that we understand what the issue is and how do we move forward and fix the issues instead of just saying, well, you're wrong and I'm right. Because I don't think that's done us any good over the last, I don't know, decade or two that we've been on national political scale, but also on the local politics scale, right? We need people here that are going to be able to make these changes and do it in an effective way that's not going to, alienate one side of the fence. Once we are able to see that this is a human issue, like James was speaking to, a human heart issue, then I think we'll have the dialogue that's necessary to change it. But until then, I think we're going to be stuck in the same rut. So 10 years from now, there's 2 presidential cycles. I would like to have somebody in power that understands what's going on and wants to effectively change it. And then obviously there's multiple local elections that you have the opportunity to truly enforce change, because most change is local anyway, right? And influence your sphere of people, right? I'm not asking Kevin Williams to fix the African-American issue. I'm asking you to, in your group of 5, this discussion. And if you could change 5 or 10 people's minds, and I can change 5 or 10 people's minds, and so on and so forth, then we'll be able to do this more effectively than trying to implement one, over-sweeping thing that fixes it all, because I don't think that'll work.
This is a watershed moment in our history. I don't think there's any question about it. I can only hope that 10 years from now, that, your children no longer have to deal with some of the things you've had to deal with. That may be a little bit too much to hope for overnight. But certainly, I think we all want the same thing. We want our children and our grandchildren to have a better world to live in than what we had. And we can only hope that will happen. James Young, Dennis Adams, Tahj Holden, I can't thank you enough for your time. Let's consider doing this again somewhere down the road, because I want to be part of the solution, not the problem as well. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.